The judge did not look at me when he said I was weak. He did not raise his voice. He said it the way people announce the weather, flat and certain, as if it were already agreed upon by everyone in the room. "My testimony is worthless," he said, and the sound of his gavel touching the bench felt heavier than the words themselves. The courtroom was full in a way that made the air feel tight. Not crowded exactly, but watched. Local reporters filled the back row with notepads balanced on their knees. A few well-dressed women from the Arts Council sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering behind carefully folded hands. I recognized two private collectors from openings at the gallery, their eyes moving between me and my dad like this was just another exhibition they had come to judge. The gallery had been part of this city for decades. People noticed when its name was spoken in court. I sat at the defense table, hands folded, spine straight, doing my best to look calm. Inside, my thoughts moved faster than my breath. I could feel eyes on my back, on my face, on the small movements I did not realize I was making. Every blink felt observed. Every swallow felt recorded. I was not just a woman in a lawsuit. I was a daughter being measured against her father in public. My dad stood on the other side of the aisle, tall and composed, his suit pressed sharp enough to cut. He looked like a man who expected to win, not because he was right, but because he always had. His posture was relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the table, as if this were a meeting he had already prepared for. When he glanced at me, his eyes did not soften. They narrowed, just slightly, the way they always had when he was deciding whether something still served him. Judge Alton Reeves sat above us, shoulders square, his expression neutral to the point of cruelty. He had known my dad for years. Everyone in that room knew it. They had gone to the same university, worked the same circles, raised their children in the same neighborhoods. He never said my dad's name with warmth, but he did not need to. The familiarity was in the pauses, in the way he leaned forward when my dad's attorney spoke, in how quickly he cut off my lawyer when questions took too long. "We do not need to linger here," the judge said at one point, tapping his pen against the bench. "Time is limited. Let us stay focused." Focused meant narrow. Focused meant convenient. Focused meant that every detail that could complicate the story was treated like an inconvenience instead of evidence. My dad's attorney stood and spoke smoothly, confidently, laying out the argument that had been rehearsed for weeks. I was inexperienced. I was emotional. I had inherited something I did not earn, and mismanaged it almost immediately. According to them, the incident with the painting was not an accident, but proof. Proof that my mom's decision to leave me the gallery had been a mistake. Proof that my dad, with his business sense and steady hand, should take control before more damage was done. Then my dad stood up. He did not have to speak. The judge did not require it, but my dad liked moments like this. He liked to be seen choosing to step forward. He looked at the room, not at me, and said calmly that he had tried to guide me, that he had offered support, that he had only stepped in when it became clear I could not handle the responsibility. He said I had been sheltered by my mom, protected from consequences, given things instead of earning them. He did not say daughter once. He said she. She lacks the discipline this role requires. She does not understand the weight of stewardship. She was given the gallery out of sentiment, not merit. Each sentence landed like a quiet slap, not loud enough to draw gasps, but sharp enough to sting. This was not about the gallery anymore. This was about erasing me. I sat there and listened, my face still, my hands folded so tightly my fingers ached. I had imagined this moment so many times. I had imagined anger rising in my chest, tears threatening to spill, my voice breaking as I defended myself. None of that happened. Instead, something colder settled in. A kind of clarity that comes when you finally see the shape of what you are up against. The judge nodded along as my dad spoke. When my lawyer stood to object, the judge waved him down almost immediately. "We are not questioning her character here," he said, even though that was exactly what was happening. "We are assessing fitness." Fitness, as if my worth could be measured like a checklist. By the fourth paragraph of testimony, the room had settled into a rhythm. Accusation, agreement, dismissal. It felt rehearsed, like a play where everyone but me knew their lines. If you are listening to this while folding laundry, or driving, or sitting with a cup of coffee that has gone cold without you noticing, I want you to know something. At that moment, I was sitting on a hard wooden chair in a courthouse that smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, wondering how many women had sat exactly where I was, being told in careful language that they were not enough. The judge cleared his throat and looked down at me for the first time. His eyes were cool, professional, distant. "Do you have anything to add before we move toward a conclusion?" he asked. "Conclusion. Already." My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered that we should respond carefully, that the judge seemed eager to wrap this up, that we could appeal later if necessary. His voice was calm, but I could hear the strain underneath. He knew what I knew. This room did not belong to us. I shook my head slightly. "Not yet," I said under my breath. The judge watched us exchange words, his mouth tightening. He did not like delays. He did not like uncertainty. He liked clean endings. "Very well," he said. "Given the testimony and the evidence presented, the court is inclined to consider immediate remedies." My dad did not smile, but his shoulders relaxed. He glanced at me again, just briefly, and for the first time that day, there was something like satisfaction in his eyes. Not joy, control. I realized then that he had already mourned me, or maybe he never had room for me to begin with. In his mind, I was not a daughter standing up for what my mom had built. I was an obstacle that needed to be moved aside. I thought of my mom, of the way she used to walk through the gallery early in the morning before it opened, her fingers brushing the frames, her footsteps soft on the floor. She had believed in me in a way that did not require proof. She had trusted me without needing to test me. My dad never had. The judge lifted his gavel again. "If there are no further statements, we will proceed." I felt the moment closing, like a door swinging shut. This was it. If I stayed silent now, the story would be written without me, not just legally, but permanently. So I stood. The movement was small, but it rippled through the room. The chairs shifted. Pens paused. The judge looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "I am not here to argue," I said quietly. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Then please be brief," the judge replied, already impatient. I stepped closer to the microphone. I did not raise my head. I did not look at my dad. I leaned in just enough for the microphone to catch my breath, just enough for the room to lean forward with me. And I whispered one name, Maribel Knox. I said nothing else. The judge's hand stilled midair, just for a second. Barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. My dad's expression changed, just as quickly. A flicker of something crossed his face before he smoothed it away. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. A low murmur moved through the gallery like a breeze. No one asked whose name was. No one entered the room. The judge cleared his throat, visibly annoyed, and looked at me again. "We will address irrelevant statements later," he said, but the rhythm was broken. I sat back down, my heart pounding now, not with fear, but with something else, something patient, something awakened. The door had not opened yet, but it would. I could feel the weight of that moment settling around me as the courtroom faded in. My mind and another place rose in its place, a place that had shaped me long before any judge or lawsuit ever could. Whenever I reached a point where my breath felt tight in my chest, my memory carried me back to the gallery. It always started with the smell. Oil paint and old wood and something faintly floral from the potpourri my mom kept near the front desk. Whitcomb Gallery was not just a building. It was a pulse, steady and warm, and for as long as I could remember, it felt more like home than the house I grew up in. My grandma had founded it long before I was born, long before my mom was old enough to reach the top shelves where the smaller sculptures were stored. I grew up on stories about her. She had come to Savannah in her early 20s, carrying just a few rolled canvases and a belief that art mattered, even if no one else understood it yet. People said she was stubborn, that she would rather miss a sale than compromise on the authenticity of a piece. I used to sit on the floor of her old office, tracing the grain of the wooden cabinets while my mom told me how Grandma built the gallery from a tiny storefront into what it became. A place artists trusted. A place collectors respected. A place where the promise of something beautiful hung in the air like dust motes, catching sunlight. My earliest memories are of running my fingers lightly along the edges of picture frames. I learned that paintings had weight, not just in the physical sense, but in the way they pulled you into them. My mom used to stop behind me and whisper about brushstrokes and color temperature, and why the artist chose a certain angle. She never talked about money when she talked about art. She talked about feelings, meaning. She taught me to listen to silence as much as stories. Dad never understood that part of me. He would stop by the gallery sometimes, usually on his way to a meeting or coming from one. He stayed near the entrance, checking his watch, looking at the paintings like they were inventory instead of expressions of someone's soul. He once told me art was a luxury, and that luxury should be leveraged, not protected. I remember feeling my mom stiffen beside me when he said that. She smiled at him, but it was the tight kind of smile she used when she did not want to start an argument in public. Dad liked numbers. He liked charts and projections and the clean certainty of a profit margin. The gallery did not speak to him the way it spoke to the women who raised me. It was like watching someone visit a foreign country and refuse to learn a single word of the language. When I was little, my mom would take me into the back storage room where the air felt cooler and everything sounded softer. She would unroll a canvas and let me hold the edges while she inspected it under the bright overhead lights. Do not think of worth, she would tell me. Think of intent. Think of courage. Think of the moment the artist decided this idea mattered enough to exist. I carried those words inside me for years. They shaped how I saw the world, how I understood myself, but they also shaped the distance between my dad and me, a distance that grew with time, even when no one acknowledged it. I remember the first time my dad brought up the idea of expanding the gallery into something larger, something that would bring in what he called real revenue. I must have been around 12, maybe 13. He stood in the middle of the front room, pointing at the walls like he was planning a renovation. He talked about modernizing the brand, partnering with investors, offering high-quality reproductions for customers who could not afford originals. My mom listened without interrupting, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. When he finally paused, she said very gently that the gallery did not need to become something it was not. Dad argued that it would open doors. Mom replied that some doors were not meant to be opened if they meant closing others behind them. I did not understand everything they said back then, but I knew that their worlds were not the same. I also knew which world felt like mine. Years passed, and the gallery remained mostly unchanged. Paintings were rotated, lighting was updated, but the spirit of the place stayed the same. My mom insisted on preserving it, the way Grandma had intended. People came from other cities just to see the exhibitions she curated. She had an instinct for pairing pieces, for creating conversations between artworks that made visitors stop and think longer than they meant to. Then one afternoon, when I was in my late teens, my dad walked in with someone new. A woman with dark hair pulled into a sleek knot and a portfolio bag slung over her shoulder. He introduced her as a friend from his university days. Her name was Maribel Knox. I remember shaking her hand. Her grip was cool, firm, and practiced. She complimented the gallery, saying it had character. When she looked around, her eyes were sharp and calculating in a way that stood out to me even then. But I told myself I was being unfair. She was polite, professional, and my dad seemed eager for my mom to consider her for some upcoming logistics work, moving pieces safely between the gallery and clients. My mom asked a few questions. What experience did she have? What drew her to the arts? Maribel answered smoothly, confidently. She had worked in event coordination for years, she said, and believed she could help streamline the gallery's workflow. I watched my mom's expression carefully, looking for signs of approval or hesitation. She remained open but cautious, the way she always was with new people. There was nothing in that first meeting that explained what would come later. No warning sign I could point to, just a flicker of discomfort in my chest. A feeling I brushed away because I did not want to appear childish or territorial. In the months that followed, Maribel became a quiet presence in the background. She assisted with inventory logs, transportation schedules, and packaging materials. My mom treated her kindly, but kept boundaries firm. Maribel was helpful, always ready with a folder or an update when my dad asked about something. I did not see her often, but when I did, she nodded at me with a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember one evening when the sun was low and the gallery lights had not been turned on yet. My mom stood in the middle of the main exhibit room, looking at a painting Grandma had acquired decades before. The whole place glowed with that soft, golden haze of late afternoon. She turned to me and said something I did not fully understand until many years later. A gallery is not a machine to be optimized. It is a sanctuary. People bring their pain here, their hope, their hunger for meaning. If we ever treat it like a business first and a calling second, we lose what makes it alive. I had not asked a question. She offered the words anyway, as if she needed me to know them before I grew older and the world tried to reshape me. Looking back now, I can see she sensed something shifting. Maybe it was my dad's growing interest in how the gallery was run. Maybe it was the presence of Maribel in conversations where she did not belong. Maybe it was simply the weight of time pressing her to say out loud the truth she feared might fade. Those words settled into me like a seed. I did not know they would be the anchor I held onto when everything else around me began to slip. I only knew that when she spoke to them, her voice was steady, sure, almost protective. A sanctuary, not a machine. Even now, sitting in this court of cold faces and careful lies, I can still hear her saying it. And maybe that is why whispering Maribel's name felt like the first honest breath had taken in years. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of the need to protect something sacred before it was twisted into something it was never meant to be. That thought stayed with me as the memory faded and the courtroom came back into focus. Somewhere ahead of me, the truth had begun to move, quiet and certain, the way sunlight moves across a gallery floor just before the doors open for day. Somewhere ahead of me, the truth had begun to move, quiet and certain, the way sunlight moves across a gallery floor just before the doors open for day. That slow shift in light always reminded me of my mom, especially in the year everything changed. It was in the spring of 2021 when she died, early in the morning. The kind of morning where the world feels suspended for a moment before it accepts a loss. I had known it was coming, but that never made the arrival easier. Grief does not check the calendar. It simply walks in. After the funeral, Savannah felt different. The streets were the same. The humidity still clung to the edges of my hair every time I stepped outside. The gallery lights still flickered to life when I unlocked the door, but nothing was in the same place inside me. My mom had been the anchor of the gallery. She was the quiet authority behind every decision. When she left, it felt like the center shifted. The trust she created decades before transferred ownership to me. My name appeared on legal documents, on tax filings, on the plaque at the entrance. People told me I should be proud. They told me my mom knew what she was doing when she made that decision. All I felt was the weight of her absence pressing down on my spine. I tried to manage the gallery with a combination of muscle memory and instinct. I knew the artists. I knew the layout. I knew the flow of customers during different seasons. But I did not know how to carry grief and responsibility at the same time. I would walk into her old office and stop just short of sitting in her chair, as if doing so would erase her even more. The trust attorney, Grant Holloway, met with me several times to go over documents, obligations, and legal requirements. He was patient, but patience does not fix the feeling of drowning. My dad began coming around more often. At first, I thought he was checking on me. That is what he told relatives when they asked why he spent so much time at the gallery. Helping my daughter, he would say, but the way he looked around the space told a different story. His eyes did not linger on the art. They lingered on the potential. He started with small suggestions. He said the gallery needed stronger financial strategies, more diversified revenue streams, better inventory protocols. He spoke like someone giving professional advice, not someone grieving the same woman I lost. When I said I needed time, he nodded, but it was the type of nod people use when they are only pausing, not stopping. Maribel stepped in more frequently as well. After my mom's death, she took over coordinating art transportation and scheduling. She moved quietly, always offering calm efficiency. She kept lists, updated spreadsheets, and handled shipments with precision. On the surface, she was steadying something that felt like it could collapse any moment. But sometimes, I would catch the faintest expression on her face when she reviewed an invoice or examined a painting. A flicker of calculation that reminded me of my dad. They started arriving together on certain days. Dad would walk into the gallery with Maribel trailing slightly behind, holding her portfolio bag or a set of forms. He introduced her to artists as if he were a co-owner instead of someone with no formal ties to the place. He made comments about display arrangements, marketing strategies, and possible partnerships with outside investors. He spoke as if the gallery were something he had been waiting to shake, and now that Mom was gone, he finally had a clear path. The first time he mentioned reproductions, I thought I had misheard him. I remember standing by the front window, adjusting the spotlight on a new landscape painting. Dad walked up beside me, hands in his pockets. You know, high-quality copies could boost revenue and reduce the pressure on original acquisitions, he said in a casual tone. I did not turn toward him. I kept my eyes on the painting. That is not what we do, I said. It is what a lot of successful galleries do, he replied, leaning against the frame of the window. You will fall behind if you refuse to adapt. I shook my head. Adaptation is not the same as dilution. He sighed the way he always did when he thought I was being emotional instead of rational. His voice softened, but not with sympathy, with persuasion. You can honor your mom and still run this place with a clearer vision, he said. I did not respond. I walked away, pretending to check a shipment list. Maribel watched us from across the room. Her eyes moved between us, her expression unreadable. When I passed her, she offered a small smile, polite and distant, as if she wanted to assure me that she understood both sides. I did not want her to understand. I wanted space. I wanted the gallery to remain what my mom intended. I wanted room to breathe without someone telling me how I should rebuild myself. But space was something I quickly learned I would not be given. In the months that followed, my dad's suggestions became more pointed. He asked for access to the gallery's financial reports. He offered to oversee cost efficiency. He made comments about staffing and scheduling. Sometimes he framed them as questions. Sometimes he presented them as the next logical step. I kept my answers polite but firm. This is not what Mom wanted. This is not the direction the gallery needs. Each time, he frowned slightly, as if trying to understand why I insisted on carrying the burden alone. You are overwhelmed, he said one afternoon, standing in the main room with a stack of invoices in his hands. You cannot run this place by emotion. You need structure. I told him I was figuring it out. He said figuring it out was not a strategy. The air between us began to chill, long before either of us admitted there was a problem. Conversations grew shorter. Smiles became thin. I started avoiding being alone with him in the gallery because each moment felt like a negotiation I did not agree to take part in. Then, one day, I noticed something small but unsettling. A shipment record had been updated without my approval. A painting, scheduled for private viewing, had been rerouted to a storage facility, rather than the showroom. The timestamp showed it had been adjusted early in the morning, before I even arrived. I asked the staff about it. No one claimed responsibility. When I checked the digital logs, the access code belonged to Maribel. I approached her later that afternoon. She was in the back office sorting packing materials. I saw a routing change for the Hadley piece, I said evenly. I did not order that. She looked up at me with a polite expression. Your dad mentioned there was a concern about humidity in the viewing room. He thought it would be safer to hold the piece in temporary storage. My pulse tightened. My dad was not authorized to make decisions about art placement or care. That was part of the trust. I exhaled slowly. Next time, I need to approve any changes, I said. Of course, she replied with an apologetic tilt of her head. I did not mean to overstep. I thought I was helping. Helping. That word had begun to feel like a blade with a soft handle. Everyone said they were helping me while slowly rearranging the gallery around me, moving pieces of my mom's legacy 1 inch at a time. That evening, after closing, I walked through each room in silence. The lights hummed overhead. Shadows stretched across the floor. I paused in front of a portrait my mom had adored. I studied the brushstrokes, the color layered like breath against a canvas. And in that quiet moment, something inside me hardened. Not out of anger, but out of recognition. The world around me was shifting whether I wanted it to or not. My dad was stepping into spaces he did not belong. Maribel was becoming a gatekeeper without my consent. And the gallery itself, this sanctuary my mom and grandma had poured their lives into, was starting to feel like it was slipping out of my hands. I rested my fingertips on the frame of the painting, the wood cool beneath my skin. The truth had begun to move, quiet and certain. And I knew something else now. If I did not find a way to protect what remained, loss would not just be something that happened to me. It would be something that defined me. I was not ready for what came next, but I could feel the first ripple of it waiting just beneath the surface, and it broke sooner than I expected. It happened on a warm Friday evening, the kind of Savannah night when the air feels thick enough to hold its own breath. I was standing in the gallery office, sorting through a series of invoices, when my phone buzzed with a message from Julian Fairmont, one of our most respected international collectors. He was a man who never wasted words. Even his brief greetings always felt deliberate. That night, his message held only 2 sentences. "We need to talk. It is urgent." My stomach tightened. I had personally overseen the sale of a rare landscape he had admired for years, a piece my mom used to call a quiet treasure. We had wrapped it, documented its transfer, and sent it through our most trusted courier. Everything had been handled with care, with the kind of precision my mom taught me. There was no reason for alarm, yet something in his tone made me sit straighter. I called him immediately. He answered on the first ring, and there was none of his usual warmth. His voice was clipped and cold, the tone of someone trying hard to contain humiliation. "Rowan, the painting you sent me is not the original." The words landed like a blow. For a moment, the world narrowed. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. "There must be a mistake," I said softly. "I checked the piece myself before shipping." "I would like to believe that," he replied, "but I had it examined this evening. The colors are off. The texture is wrong. The signature placement is inconsistent with the artist's pattern. Someone sent me a copy." I closed my eyes. I could hear his pride cracking beneath the disappointment. Collectors like Julian lived by reputation. Presenting a fake at a private showing could damage him in ways money could not. Repair. "I will fix this," I said, though the words felt thin. "I promise you, I will make this right." There was a long pause on the other end. "I do not know what happened on your end, Rowan," he finally said, "but people are already whispering. I need answers very soon." After he hung up, I stood there in the dark office, my mind racing through every step of the process. I walked down to the shipping room and opened the logs. I traced the document trail from acquisition to authentication to packaging. Everything looked correct on paper. I could almost feel the truth hiding between the lines. I called the courier company. They confirmed the pickup time, the handler, the delivery route. Every entry was clean. Too clean. When records are flawless, in situations that should show variation, something is wrong. The next morning, the whispers began. A prominent collector receiving a forgery was the kind of story people passed along, without waiting for confirmation. By noon, I had 3 messages from smaller clients asking if their purchases were safe. By late afternoon, a local arts blogger posted a short piece questioning whether Whitcomb Gallery had lost its standards after my mom's passing. That one hurt most of all. The gallery floor felt different that day. People lingered, but their eyes carried doubt instead of curiosity. Staff members avoided meeting my gaze, not out of blame, but out of fear. Fear of being tied to a sinking ship. Fear that the world around them was about to change. My dad arrived shortly after closing. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Confidence. Measured. The sound of a man walking into an opportunity he had been waiting for. "So," he said, as if greeting an inconvenient truth, "I heard about the situation with Julian." I took a slow breath. "We need to investigate every step of the shipment. Someone tampered with the piece." "Or," he said, lifting his eyebrows, "someone here made a careless mistake." His tone was not accusing. It was casually destructive, like someone noting the weather again. Statement the obvious, in a way that left the listener with nowhere to stand. I stared at him. "We did not send a fake." He paced the room slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "You have been under a lot of pressure, Rowan. You have been juggling more than you should. These things happen when management is overwhelmed." Management. That word wrapped itself around my throat. My dad spoke as if he had already rewritten the narrative, as if the whole city had agreed with him before he finished the thought. I told him everything I knew, every fact I could gather. He nodded along, occasionally making a sympathetic sound, though nothing in his expression resembled sympathy. Finally, he said, "You know, situations like this highlight the importance of stronger oversight. If the gallery had a more experienced hand guiding operations, this could have been avoided." I knew what he was implying. He did not need to finish the sentence. The air between us grew heavier. Maribel stepped into the room then, holding a folder of rerouted shipping forms. She glanced at me briefly before turning to my dad, her voice soft. "I compiled everything you asked for." "You asked for these?" I said, looking at him. He shrugged lightly. "Just gathering information." I opened the folder. The documents felt wrong. Too reorganized, too curated. It felt like looking at a puzzle someone had carefully rearranged to force a different picture. When I looked up at them, both watching me, I felt it clearly. A shift. A line being crossed. The following week was the hardest of my professional life. Meetings, calls, accusations dressed as questions. People circling truth without touching it. Julie Vane demanded a full investigation. I supported it. My dad announced that he would conduct his own review. I never asked him to. He took that silence as consent. The blow landed 3 days later. Right after the gallery closed, I opened my email, expecting updates from the courier. Instead, I found a letter from an attorney whose name I did not recognize. The words sharpened as I read them. A formal claim was being filed against me, stating negligence in the management of Whitcomb Gallery, failure to maintain quality standards, and actions that had harmed the gallery's reputation and financial stability. The claimant was my dad. For a moment, the room tilted. The air went thin. I reread the name on the document because I thought I had misunderstood, but there it was, clear. Cold, intentional. My dad was suing me. I sat down hard in my chair, the edges pressing into my back. Noise faded out. Everything around me grew distant. I felt the way I did when I used to swim too far from shore as a kid. That slow rising panic when the waves begin pulling you in a direction you did not choose. I wanted to call someone. But who? Most people still believed my dad was stepping in to help me. They believed his version of things because he said them with confidence. With the authority of someone used to winning, my voice had become background noise in my own life. I lifted the phone to call Grant Holloway. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally sat it down again. I was not ready to say it out loud. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the main gallery room. The lights were dimmed, the paintings resting in soft evening shadows. I stopped in front of the piece that had been my mom's favorite. She used to stand here late at night, her hand resting gently on the frame, as if she were comforting it rather than admiring it. I pressed my fingertips to the same spot. The wood felt warm under my touch, as if it had been holding on to the day. "He does not get to take this from me," I whispered to the quiet room, though my voice shook. He does not get to rewrite what this place is, but standing there, one truth pressed itself into my mind. He had already started. The lawsuit was not the first step. It was just the first one he made public. The others had been happening in the shadows, in subtle shifts, in small, rerouted steps he hoped I would not notice. As I turned off the lights and locked the gallery, the night air wrapped around me, thick and restless. I knew then that whatever came next was going to cut deeper than anything that had happened so far. I had not yet lost everything, but I could feel the edge of it brushing against me. And the worst part was knowing this was not an attack from a stranger. It was the first real strike from my dad, and by the time morning came, the bruises had already begun to settle under my skin. I woke before sunrise, my mind tangled in half-formed thoughts about the lawsuit. Even saying that word to myself felt surreal, like a lawsuit, as if someone had carved a line between us that could never be walked back. I drove to Grant Holloway's office as soon as the city began to stir. The air was cool, the streets quiet, and the weight in my chest heavier than anything I had carried in years. Grant had been my mom's attorney for a long time. He had known me since I was a teenager wandering the gallery halls, study frames while adults talked over me. He greeted me with the same gentle calm he always carried, but I could see the worry settle in his eyes the moment he saw the envelope in my hand. "Tell me everything, Rowan." I sat across from him and handed him the notice. He read in silence, his eyebrows lowering a fraction at a time. When he finished, he placed the papers on his desk, folded his hands, and let out a slow breath. "This is not about a painting," he said. "This is about your dad trying to take the gallery from you entirely. He wants the trustee removed, the trust rewritten under the claim of your incompetence, and control transferred to him until the court decides you are fit again, which, knowing him, will never be." A numbness spread through me. The idea of losing the gallery was painful, but hearing him say it so plainly made my heart tighten in a way that surprised me. "He cannot take what my mom left me," I said quietly. "He is trying," Grant replied, "and he knows exactly where to push. The accusation of mismanagement linked to the forgery incident is the lever he thinks will break your hold on the trust." I looked down at my hands. They felt too still, as if even my fingers understood the danger better than my mind could. Grant leaned back slightly. "The real issue is that the judge assigned to this case has a long friendship with your dad. That makes this harder." My chest tightened further. Judge Alton Reeves was well known in Savannah, a man of polished manners and traditional opinions, the sort who valued old alliances. I had met him twice in my life, and both times he looked at me the same way he looked at a painting whose style he did not care for. Grant continued, "He might not do anything overt, but he can control the pace, what gets reviewed, what gets dismissed. And that can tilt the whole case." I understood then why my dad had filed so quickly, why he had chosen this moment, when the public story was still shaped around the humiliation of a collector, rather than the truth of what happened behind the scenes. He knew how perception worked. He knew how timing worked. And he knew exactly who would handle the case. We met again that afternoon in a small conference room at the courthouse to go over initial motions. I felt the shift in the air as soon as the judge entered. He moved with practiced authority, his face composed, his eyes scanning us briefly before settling on the papers in front of him. We argued for a deeper investigation into the shipping process. Grant presented a motion requesting access to the internal logs and employee communications for the week of the sale. If someone tampered with the painting, we needed proof. Judge Reeves barely glanced up. Motion denied. That line of inquiry is not central to the petition. Grant stiffened beside me. "With respect, Your Honor, determining whether my client actually committed any managerial negligence is extremely relevant." The judge lifted a hand, almost bored. "The petition is about your client's fitness to operate the trust, not the logistics of a single transaction. We are not here to unravel every shipping error." "It was not a shipping error," I said, before I could stop myself. My voice was calm, steady, but something inside me trembled. His eyes flicked toward me. "Miss Hayes, you will speak only through counsel. And let me remind both of you, this court does not intend to waste time on peripheral details." Peripheral. The word burned. The entire truth of what happened to that painting was being shoved aside before we even stepped onto the playing field. The judge moved through the remaining motions quickly. He denied another request for an independent art authentication analysis. He denied a request for an operations audit. He denied even the simple motion to extend the discovery window. When Grant tried to argue again, the judge cut him off sharply. "Counselor, you are drifting outside the scope. The petition concerns the trust, not the daily business of the gallery. Narrow your focus." The air in the room felt thin. I sat there, listening, realizing in real time that the process was never going to allow truth to rise. My dad's case was not about facts. It was about framing me as unstable, inexperienced, unworthy of the inheritance my mom left. And the judge was making sure the frame stayed intact. After the session adjourned, I stepped outside to clear my thoughts. The hallway smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. My dad was waiting. He stood near the window with one hand in his pocket, the posture of a man who had already won. He approached me with slow, deliberate steps. "You cannot win this, Rowan." I stared at him. The man I grew up believing might soften someday. The man I once thought might eventually see me, stood there looking at me like a problem to be managed. He lowered his voice. "This was never about one painting. It is about control. The gallery needs someone capable of running it without emotion clouding their decisions. You are not that person." A chill ran through me. "You think you can destroy my standing and still call yourself a protector?" He gave a small, almost pitying smile. "I am trying to fix something before it collapses completely. If you just step aside willingly, we can avoid dragging this into a long fight." Step aside, as if he were offering kindness, as if he were doing me a favor while taking everything my mom trusted me with. Grant walked up then, his voice steady but edged. "We are not stepping aside, and this conversation should not continue without counsel." My dad did not even look at him when he replied. "Some truths do not need lawyers." He walked away without waiting for my response. Only when he turned the corner did my breath finally return. Grant placed a hand on the edge of the bench beside us, grounding me. "He is pushing you emotionally," Grant said quietly. "If you react, if you show any instability, he will use it. He knows exactly what he is doing." We returned to the courtroom 30 minutes later for a procedural update. The judge flipped through his notes before speaking. "This court intends to limit the review strictly to the matter of Miss Hayes's managerial capability in relation to the trust. External issues, including alleged tampering or fraud by third parties, will not be considered unless incontrovertible evidence is presented." My heart dropped. The door was closing. He was building the walls around the argument, shaping the battlefield to favor my dad before the real fight even began. Grant stood. "Your Honor, we request reconsideration. The scope is too narrow to allow a fair review of the underlying issues." "Denied," the judge said, finishing the word before Grant even settled back into his seat. A quiet settled in the room after that. Not silence, but an understanding. A foregone conclusion tightening into place, inch by inch. My dad sat in the front row. His posture relaxed. His expression is unreadable. I looked at him, trying to understand when caring for him had turned into surviving him. He had once carried me on his shoulders at a summer fair. He had once taught me how to tie my shoes. Yet here we were, standing on opposite sides of a divide he had created long before I ever knew it existed. When the judge ended the session, people began filing out. Papers rustled. Noose clicked against the floor. My dad stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary, letting the atmosphere settle around him like a crown he believed he still deserved. Grant touched my arm lightly. "We will keep fighting, Rowan. But for now, the judge's ruling narrows our path." Narrowed was not the right word. It felt strangled, like someone had taken a pair of hands to the truth and pressed down slowly. As we stepped out into the late afternoon light, I felt the shift again. The shape of this battle was no longer hidden. My dad had never wanted resolution, only dominance, and the courtroom had become his arena, with a referee already leaning to his side. But I could feel something else rising inside me, a clarity, a stillness, a line that solidified the moment the judge declared the scope of the case. If they were going to ignore the truth, then I would bring them something they could not ignore. For now, though, I simply walked to the curb and breathed in the warm savanna air. The day was ending, but the fight was not. It was only beginning to reveal its true shape. Something inside me tightened the moment I stepped out into the warm savanna air, as if the sunlight itself pressed a hand against my back and urged me forward. I walked to my car without knowing where I was going. Not home. Not the gallery. I needed distance from everything that felt familiar, because the truth I had been burying for years was finally pushing its way to the stop. Surface, steady and unrelenting. I drove until the city thinned and quiet roads carried me past marshland and open sky. When I finally pulled over, the world around me was quiet, except for the soft hum of insects and the wind moving through tall grass. I sat there with both hands gripping the steering wheel, my breath shaking in a way I had tried to ignore for years. I had been hiding a secret for so long, that it had become second nature, the way people learn to breathe without thinking. But now, that secret felt heavy, like something I had to hold in my arms instead of tuck behind my ribs. The original landscape Julian bought, the painting that had been switched for a copy, the one that had dragged my name through every corner of the art world for the past month, was mine. Not mine in the sense of ownership, mine in the sense of creation. I painted it years before my mom died. Before the trust, before the gallery landed squarely on my shoulders, I started painting quietly at night. I never told anyone. The gallery was my family's legacy, but I never wanted my work to cloud what my grandmother and my mom had built. I wanted to learn the craft without inheriting a reputation. I wanted to make something without someone assuming it held value because of the name printed on the gallery door. So I created a pseudonym, a simple signature. R. Kell. A name built from letters that meant something only to me. I uploaded photographs of my pieces to a tiny online art community where most people used nicknames. I even sold a handful of works there, small ones, mostly studies of light or single objects. No one knew who I was. I felt safe in anonymity. Then one night, I painted that landscape, a river cutting through tall grass, a cloudy sky holding the last pink of sunset, the shadows lifting from the edge of a wooden fence. It was personal. Not a commission, not a study, just something I needed to put on canvas because the image would not leave me alone. Months later, when the gallery needed a new spotlight piece to draw interest before an exhibition, my mom found it in my studio storage closet. I still remember the way she held it, her hand gentle against the frame, her eyes softer than I had ever seen. "You did this," she said. It was not a question. I nodded, terrified and proud all at once. She did not pressure me. She did not tell me to put my name on it. She simply said that some art is meant to reach the world. She asked if she could display it with the others for a short time, anonymously. I agreed, because I trusted her. Only her. When she passed the next year, I removed the painting, packed it in archival paper, and stored it again. It did not belong to the gallery. It felt too connected to her, too connected to a version of myself I was not ready to share. But months later, when Julian walked through the gallery and asked about that landscape, when he said it reminded him of a summer he had once lived and lost, my heart shook. I sold it to him quietly, using the pseudonym. No one questioned it. Not even Maribel, who handled the final paperwork under the assumption the seller was some small, independent artist we managed for special acquisitions. No one except me knew the truth. And that truth was now the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. I leaned back in my car and closed my eyes. The memory poured over me, one detail at a time. The brush strokes, the way I layered the light, the signature in the lower right corner, slightly angled because I had been too nervous to write with my own hands steadily. I knew every detail because I had created every detail. And there was one thing no one could argue against. No one forges their own work. No one creates a piece from their own hands and then makes a poor imitation to send to a collector who could expose them. There was no logic in that accusation, no advantage to be gained, only destruction. The fake painting that went to Julian was created by someone else. And I knew exactly where the switch had likely happened. Maribel had been in charge of coordinating the pickup. She had access to the locked archives. She had control over the packing schedules. She had been the last person to handle the shipment before the courier arrived. And she had been drifting closer to my dad for months, offering to streamline operations, whispering suggestions that felt rehearsed. But knowing and proving were two different things. I drove back to the gallery before closing time. The building felt different now, as if the walls had absorbed the tension of the past few weeks and were holding their breath. I walked into the back storage room and turned on the light. Dust particles floated in the beam like suspended secrets. I opened the shipping logs again. This time, I did not skim them. I went line by line, looking for something out of place, and it showed itself much faster than I expected. The painting was logged for pickup at 8 in the morning, but the internal movement record, the one that tracked who had accessed the climate-controlled storage, showed that the painting had been checked out at 7:15 under Maribel's digital key. There was no reason for her to access the piece that early. There was no reason for anyone except the courier to handle it after 8. The timing was too tight, too convenient. My heart pounded. I took pictures of the logs, then went to the security office in the back hall. The cameras did not cover everything, but they did cover the loading dock hallway. The guard on duty, a quiet older man named Patrick, had known me since I was a child. He watched me as I approached, his expression gentle but tired. "Long day, Miss Rowan," he said. "Something like that," I replied. I hesitated, then asked, "Would it be possible to review footage from the morning of the shipment for the Fairmont piece? Just the hallway cameras." He looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. "Your mom always said the truth never hides forever." He typed into the system and pulled up the files. We watched the footage together. 8 minutes after 7, Maribel walked down the hallway toward the storage area. She carried a flat box under her arm, not a shipping box, but a portfolio case, the kind used for transporting works that did not require immediate documentation. She disappeared from the camera frame, then reappeared 20 minutes later with a different box in her hands, wrapped in the gallery's archival paper. She checked her phone, then walked briskly toward the prep room. My pulse quickened. That portfolio case, that timing, that detour. She had the opportunity, the access, and the confidence of someone who did not expect to be watched. Patrick narrowed his eyes as the video looped back. "That is not a standard procedure." I swallowed hard. "No, it is not." He cleared his throat and leaned back. "I cannot give you a copy of this without a formal request, but I can log it as an irregularity, and I can tell you it will not be hard for your attorney to obtain it once it is on the record." A flood of gratitude surged through me. "Thank you," I whispered. After leaving the security room, I walked to the far studio. The one I had used before the trust made me the gallery's full-time caretaker. The light was dimmer there, softer, as if it understood people came in tired and left changed. My old easel sat in the corner, folded, but still speckled with paint I had never bothered to clean. I unfolded it and placed it upright. I was not there to paint. I was there to remind myself of something. I stood in front of it and let the truth settle over me completely. I had hidden my work out of fear. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of overshadowing my mom, fear of becoming a product instead of an artist. But silence had consequences. My silence had allowed people like my dad and Maribel to twist the narrative until I was the problem, the incompetent one, the liability. Not anymore. I took a breath that felt like opening a locked door inside myself. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to bring the truth into the light, no matter how exposed it made me feel. The evidence was forming in my hands. The next steps would be harder, riskier, but I was ready for the weight of it. I was ready for the consequences. As I turned off the lights in the studio and stepped back into the hallway, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. No hesitation. Resolve. I had finally claimed the one truth no one could take from me. And with that truth, I was ready to walk into whatever storm waited next. The resolve inside me stayed with me through the night, a steady pulse that kept me awake long after I lay down. By morning, I felt wired, alert, almost sharpened. The evidence I had gathered sat in a folder beside my bag, and for the first time since the lawsuit began, I walked toward the courthouse with a sense of direction instead of dread. The crowd outside was larger than usual. Word had spread quickly in Savannah's art community, and the case had taken on a life of its own. Photographers stood near the steps. Collectors whispered. A few former clients stopped talking when they recognized me. Some looked curious. Others looked uneasy. I kept my chin steady, my steps even. Grant met me at the entrance. His expression was calm, but I could see something flicker in his eyes when he saw the folder in my hand. "You found something?" "Yes," I said quietly, enough to raise questions they cannot ignore. He nodded without asking more. The hallway was too crowded, too filled with ears and intentions. We entered the courtroom together, and the heat of conversations brushed over us like static. Judge Reeves arrived late, which he never did. When he walked in, he seemed irritated, as if the case had already taken more time than he believed it deserved. He adjusted his glasses and glanced across the room, his gaze lingering on my dad for a brief second before turning toward the files on his desk. "Let us proceed," he said. "This court has a limited window today, so we will aim to conclude preliminary arguments." I felt the shift immediately. He intended to push the hearing toward a quick decision, a narrow decision, one that favored my dad. Grant rose first. "Your Honor, before we continue, my client has prepared critical information relevant to the authenticity of the painting central to the claim." The judge did not even look at him. I remind counsel that the painting itself is secondary to the petition. We will not turn this into an academic discussion about art techniques. Grant kept his voice steady. "With respect, the question of authenticity is directly tied to alleged negligence." "Noted," the judge responded, though he had not noted anything at all, and dismissed. The public benches shifted. People exchanged glances. Savannah was a small city, but its art world was fiercely attentive. They did not miss unfairness when it unfolded in front of them. My dad leaned back in his chair, relaxed, confident. He was dressed in a crisp navy suit, the same one he wore to major business meetings, as if this courtroom were another boardroom he intended to dominate. He whispered something to his attorney. They both smiled. Grant placed a hand on the table in front of us. He did not touch mine, but the gesture was grounding, a silent reminder to stay steady. When the judge invited the petitioner to speak, my dad stood. His voice carried easily, full of practiced control. He spoke about stewardship, responsibility, reputation. He described the gallery as a delicate legacy that needed firm guidance. He said the forgery incident had been embarrassing for the entire city. He said the trust required someone with vision and experience, someone who understood leadership. He said everything except my name. To him, I was not a daughter. I was an obstacle. When he finished, the courtroom felt muffled, as if his voice had pressed against the walls until they absorbed the message he wanted them to hold. Grant rose. "My client would like to respond." The judge sighed, impatient. Briefly, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes turning toward me. My heartbeat was steady, not soft, not fragile. Steady. "Thank you, Your Honor." I spoke clearly, calmly, the way my mom once taught me to speak when something mattered. "The claim against me is built on the assumption that I allowed a forgery to be sold in place of an original. That assumption hinges on one idea, that I did not understand the value or authenticity of the painting in question." The judge lifted a hand. "Miss Hayes, we have already addressed this. The question of authenticity is not central to the petition for trustee reassignment." "With respect," I replied, "it is central if the accusation is false." A few people in the audience murmured. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Proceed," he said reluctantly. I took a breath. The original painting that was supposed to be sent to Mr. Fairmont was not a gallery acquisition. It was a private work sold under the pseudonym R. Kell. More murmurs. The name had circulated in local art circles, but quietly, subtly, enough to make people lean forward now. The judge interjected again. "Miss Hayes, the court is not interested in online hobbyists or anonymous artists. Stick to facts relevant to the operation of the gallery." I stood straighter. "I am sticking to facts. Arkell is not an online hobbyist. Arkell is me." Gasps echoed across the room. Even the court reporter paused before catching herself and continuing to type. My dad's face drained slightly. A small shift, but visible. His jaw tightened once, betraying something he did not want anyone to see. I continued before the judge could interrupt again. "I painted the original piece myself, years ago, under a pseudonym. My mom knew, but no one else did. I sold it anonymously to preserve the integrity of the gallery and avoid turning it into a place that pushed my work instead of the artists we represented." I let the silence settle just long enough. "And because I painted it, I know exactly how it should look, down to every brushstroke, every layer of glaze, every shift in the light on the canvas. The painting, Mr. Fairmont received was not my work. The audience was no longer quiet. People whispered urgently. Some turned to one another, eyes wide. There was no version of this revelation that did not matter. No version that did not raise questions about everything that had happened. Judge Reeves rubbed the bridge of his nose. Miss Hayes, this revelation does not automatically invalidate the petitioner's concerns. It invalidates the accusation of negligence, I said. No one creates a forgery of their own work to destroy their own reputation. Grant stepped forward. Your Honor, we request immediate review of the shipping logs and internal access records from the day of the transfer. We have reason to believe the painting was switched before the courier ever arrived. The judge stiffened. This court has already denied that line of inquiry. Then I spoke again, slowly, carefully. The internal logs show that the painting was accessed more than 40 minutes before the scheduled pickup. Sections under the digital key belonging to Maribel Knox. The room erupted in noise. People turned toward my dad instantly. Even his attorney looked confused, glancing between us as if trying to calculate the fallout of this revelation in real time. The judge banged his gavel twice, frustration chipping away at his composed exterior. Order. This court will have order. Grant pressed forward. Your Honor, we have clear evidence of unauthorized early access to the painting. This is material. This is relevant. And this absolutely affects the claim of negligence being used to remove my client as trustee. The judge's lips tightened. He wanted to shut this down. I could see it plainly. He wanted to deny, dismiss, redirect. But something had shifted. Too many witnesses, too much noise, too many eyes on him. He spoke slowly this time. The tone was controlled, but strained. I will review the logs privately before determining whether additional testimony is necessary. My dad shot up from his seat. That is absurd. That woman is irrelevant. Rowan is deflecting. She is trying to confuse the issue with unrelated accusations. His voice cracked slightly, just slightly, enough that people turned toward him the way they had turned toward me minutes earlier. Grant responded calmly. The accusations concerned the exact event used to justify removing her from her legal role. That is not deflection. That is the truth. Judge Reeves looked ready to end the session abruptly. He shuffled his papers, his eyes darting between my dad, the audience, and me. The sound of whispered conversations grew louder as people tried to digest the revelation. He lifted his gavel. This court will take a brief recess before deciding how to proceed. But the words were tight, rushed, almost panicked. He was trying to stop what was coming before it arrived, before any new witness appeared, before any name could be spoken in this room that would force him to let the truth in. I lowered my hands to the table and breathed out slowly. The storm had begun to shift, and for the first time, I saw real fear flicker in my dad's eyes. Not fear of losing the gallery. Fear of what came next. The fear in my dad's eyes lingered in my mind long after the judge called the count. Recess. People rose from their benches in a loud sweep of movement, the sounds of shuffling papers and restless whispering filling every corner of the rude courtroom. I stayed seated. If I stood too quickly, I worried the adrenaline shaking inside me would show. Grant leaned down, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Stay calm. Whatever happens next, do not let him see you flinch. I nodded once. I was done flinching. When the judge returned, the room settled faster than before. Even the air felt different, like it had thickened, waiting for something it could not name yet. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and opened his mouth to speak. But I stood first. Your Honor. My voice carried in a new way. Not loud, not forceful, just steady enough that people turned toward me with a kind of quiet attention. Grant glanced at me, but he did not stop me. He knew this moment was mine. The judge lifted his eyebrows, annoyed. Miss Hayes, the court is not open for additional testimony at this time. I took one measured breath. It was not time's decision. It was mine. I would like to name a witness. A ripple cut through the courtroom. My dad straightened sharply. His attorney whispered something to him, quick and urgent, but he did not seem to hear it. The judge shook his head. The court has not approved new witnesses. We are not expanding the scope of this petition any further. I stepped forward, letting my hands rest lightly on the table so the tremor in my fingers would not show. My voice remained quiet, controlled. This witness is directly tied to the events in question, to the painting, to the trust, to the actions that were taken behind my back and outside gallery protocol. The judge exhaled sharply. Miss Hayes, we are done entertaining unsupported accusations. I felt something inside me settle into place. Something calm. Something final. The name is Maribel Knox. The entire room froze. The silence hit like a physical force. A few people inhaled sharply. Heads turned. Even the court reporter stopped typing before catching herself again. My dad's face drained, then flooded with something I could not name. Panic. Anger. Recognition. All of it collided at once. He leaned forward in his chair, gripping the table. Rowan, stop this. You do not know what you are talking about. But I did. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I was talking about. I kept my gaze on the judge. She has information relevant to the forgery, to the access logs, to the trust, and to my dad. The judge opened his mouth to shut it all down, but at that exact moment, a sound cut through the air. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Slowly, audibly, deliberately. Every head turned. Every whisper died. 2 deputies stepped inside, each flanking a woman whose face was pale and drawn, her wrists secured loosely in front of her. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes darted nervously across the room, searching for something to anchor to. Maribel. The judge froze mid-breath. He had not approved her entry. He had not even processed the name before reality overtook procedure. The gallery benches erupted in whispers, half shock, half vindication. My dad stood instantly, almost knocking over his chair. His voice cracked through the room. How can you be here? His words sounded exactly like the ones burned into, the thumbnail that would live forever in my memory. Disbelief. Fear. A realization that the ground beneath him had finally given way. Maribel did not look at him. Not once. Her eyes found mine instead, wide and filled with something between apology and exhaustion. She had been carrying a truth that had begun to crush her. Grant stepped forward. Your Honor, as you can see, Ms. Knox is present and prepared to offer testimony relevant to the case. The judge pressed a palm to the edge of his bench, steadier than his voice. Officers, why is this woman here without court order? One deputy answered calmly. She turned herself in voluntarily this morning, requesting to speak with legal authorities regarding an ongoing fraud investigation connected to Whitcomb Gallery. A louder wave spread across the room. The judge swallowed hard. He could not hide from this, not with deputies present. Not with the public watching, not with the press scribbling every second into their notebooks. He had no choice. The court will allow testimony. The words were forced out reluctantly, like he was dragging them up from deep inside his throat. My dad's attorney jumped to his feet. Your Honor, we object to this entirely. This is outside the scope. This witness is unreliable. This is an ambush. The judge cut him off, though the irritation in his voice was not aimed at me anymore. Objection overruled. The witness will speak. Maribel stepped forward slowly, escorted by the deputies. She avoided looking at my dad, but her breath hitched when she passed him. He reached toward her, his voice low and sharp. You keep your mouth shut. Do you understand me? One deputy shifted subtly between them. Maribel flinched and kept walking. When she reached the stand, she took the oath with trembling hands. Then she sat, folding her fingers tightly in her lap. The courtroom fell so silent that I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling lights. Grant approached gently, his voice soft enough to steady her. Ms. Knox, can you tell the court why you came forward today? Maribel swallowed. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. Because I have lived with guilt for too long, and I cannot keep lying. My dad shook his head violently. She is lying. She is angry I ended things. She is retaliating. None of this is real. Another wave spread across the benches, eyes locked onto him. People were seeing him clearly for the first time. Grant kept his gaze on Maribel. "Tell us what happened on the morning of the Fairmont shipment." She closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. "Your father told me to switch the painting. He said it would prove you were not capable of running the gallery, that collectors would lose faith, that the board would pressure the trust to put him in charge." My breath left me. I had suspected it. I had pieced together the clues, but hearing the words spoken aloud shook something deep inside my chest. Grant asked, "Did he instruct you to create the forgery?" Maribel nodded. "Yes, he brought me the copy weeks earlier. He told me to wait for the right moment." A gasp rolled across the benches like a wave hitting the shore. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "I knew it." My dad stepped forward, shouting now, his face turning red. "Enough! This woman is lying. I never told her any of that. She is trying to save herself by dragging me down." His outburst only exposed him more. He had lost control. The calm veneer he built so carefully was cracking in real time, peeling away layer by layer. Grant continued, unmoved. "Did Mr. Hayes offer you anything in exchange for participating?" Maribel nodded. Again, slower this time. "He promised he would make me director once he controlled the trust, that we would run the gallery together, that it would be ours." The room exploded. People shifted in disbelief. A few shook their heads. Others glared openly at my dad. Whispers rose like heat off asphalt. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! This court will have order." But there was no order left. Not for him. Not for my dad. The truth had already broken through the restraints he had tried so desperately to hold in place. Grant asked the final question. "Why did you come forward now?" Maribel lifted her eyes to mine, not to my dad, not to the judge. Because she did nothing wrong. She never deserved to be blamed for my choices, and I will not let him destroy her life the way he threatened to destroy mine. My dad erupted again, but his voice no longer landed with authority. It sounded frantic, thin, stripped of all the certainty he once wielded like a weapon. "You betrayed me." But no one listened. The court officer stepped in, placing a firm hand on his arm. His words dissolved into noise. The judge looked shaken. He stared down at his notes, then at Maribel, then at me. He had run out of places to hide, out of procedural excuses, out of shields. The power he once held had slipped between his fingers in front of the public, wanted to impress. He spoke slowly. "This court will reconvene after reviewing all testimony and evidence presented." His voice was tight, but it was no longer the voice of a man in control. As the deputies escorted Maribel out, she turned her head slightly toward me. Her eyes were swollen, but there was a small flicker of relief there, a release, maybe even hope. I stood without realizing it. I watched as she disappeared through the same door she had entered, carrying the truth that finally ended my silence. The courtroom emptied around me. People walked past whispering my name, whispering my dad's, whispering the word fraud with a new clarity. The illusion he had built for decades was collapsing, quietly, but completely, layer by layer. Exactly the way he once believed control belonged only to him. When I finally turned toward my dad, he sat frozen, staring at the table. Not at me, not at the judge, not in the room. Just the table, the first crack in a man who never believed he could break. And for the first time, I felt the beginning of something that was not victory or triumph or satisfaction, just the truth. And the room left no doubt that it had finally taken its rightful place. Karma does not rush. It does not shout. It waits quietly until the truth becomes too heavy for lies to hold. That was the feeling that settled over the courtroom the next morning. People arrived early. The benches filled faster than I had ever seen. Even the air carried a different current, a sense that something irreversible had already taken place. My dad walked in late. Not very late, just enough that the room turned to watch him. His shoulders were tense, his jaw locked tight. His attorney whispered urgently beside him, but he barely responded. The man who once moved with absolute confidence now looked like he was trying to. find solid ground beneath feet that no longer trusted the floor. Grant and I sat ready. He reviewed his notes calmly, but I knew he was giving me space to settle my breathing. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was steady. For the first time since the lawsuit began, there was no tremor in my body, only clarity. When Judge Reeves entered, his expression was strained in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The public scrutiny had become too visible, too present. He was a man who valued reputation almost as much as my dad did, and yesterday's testimony had boxed him in. He took his seat, tapped his pen against the file in front of him, and cleared his throat. The court has reviewed the statements and evidence presented. No preamble, no delay, no rescue attempt. My dad leaned forward, gripping the table as if he could will the judge to speak differently. But the judge kept his eyes down, reading from the page to avoid the weight of the audience. It is clear that significant irregularities occurred during the transaction, central to the petitioner's claim of negligence. My dad's attorney stiffened. Furthermore, the testimony of Ms. Knox raises credible questions regarding intentional interference with gallery operations. A low ripple moved through the room. My breath stayed steady. The judge paused before continuing. Given this, the court cannot attribute the alleged negligence to Miss Hayes. Instead, the court finds insufficient grounds for removing her as trustee of Whitcomb Gallery. My dad sank back in his chair. Not dramatically, not angrily, just slowly, as if the fight had drained from his body one quiet drop at a time. The judge continued. All petitions regarding trustee reassignment, operational control, and managerial oversight are denied. Grant exhaled. I had not realized he was holding his breath, too. The judge adjusted the edge of his robe. Additionally, the court recommends that the district attorney review Ms. Knox's testimony for potential criminal referral. Maribel, seated between the two deputies, closed her eyes. Not in defeat, in acceptance. The judge shut the folder, signaling the end. This court is adjourned. The gavel hit once, a clean, final sound. People rose from their benches immediately, talking in urgent, hushed tones. A few looked at me with something like respect. Others looked shocked, unsure how the story could shift so far in one day. My dad did not move. He sat frozen, staring straight ahead. His attorney touched his arm, whispered something again, but he barely responded. The courtroom emptied around him, leaving only echoes in the air. Grant packed his papers and turned to me. You did it, Rowan. I shook my head softly. No, the truth did. He squeezed my shoulder once before stepping away to give me space. I walked slowly toward my dad. My steps made soft echoes on the polished floor. When I reached him, he finally looked up, his eyes red at the edges, not from tears, but from something heavier, the shock of losing a story he believed he could control. Rowan, he said, his voice uneven. You have no idea what you've done. I held his gaze. I know exactly what I have done. He stood then, the movement sharp, as if he were trying to reclaim some authority. But when he spoke, his voice cracked. I was trying to protect the gallery, to protect our family's reputation. I let his words hang there. They sounded hollow even to him. I answered quietly. You were trying to protect, control, not the gallery, and definitely not family. He flinched but tried again. You are too emotional to run something like this. You always have been. I felt the cold truth settle into my voice. Maybe I am emotional. Maybe I feel things deeply, but that never made me incompetent. It made me honest. It made me human. He shook his head, as if shaking off the words. I built this family. I built everything we have, and now you want to destroy it. I stepped closer, my voice soft but sharper than anything I had said so far. You did not lose the gallery today. His eyes flickered with hope. A brief, confused moment. You lost the right to define your daughter. His face changed. Not anger, not grief. Something else. Something fragile. A realization that the power he had always held over me was gone. That I no longer saw him through the lens he built. That I had stepped out of his shadow without asking for permission. He stared at me, lips parted but no words coming out. For years, he had shaped every room he walked into. Today, the room shaped him. The truth shaped him. And now he was standing in front of a version of me he never expected to face. I stepped back. Grant approached me again, ready to leave. But something made me pause, just long enough to say one more thing to my dad. You taught me one lesson without meaning to. Control built on fear is not strength. It is a weakness waiting to collapse. He closed his eyes, maybe to stop himself from answering, maybe because the words reached somewhere he did not want exposed. When I walked out of the courtroom, the sun hit me with a warmth that felt unfamiliar after so many cold weeks. Reporters shouted questions. People hurried past. My name echoed in the air in pieces, fragments of a story that no longer belonged to my dad. The courthouse steps felt like neutral ground, a place between what was and what would be. I paused there, breathing slowly. Nearby, Maribel was escorted down a separate hallway. She did not look at me this time. She did not need to. Her truth had already been spoken. Karma had not screamed. It had not slammed a fist. It had simply filled the room and signed its name quietly, where everyone could see it. And as I took the final step onto the sidewalk, I felt the shift inside me, clear and steady. The gallery was still mine. But more importantly, so was I. I stepped off the courthouse sidewalk and felt the weight of everything settle into a quiet place inside me. It was not a relief, not triumph. Something steadier, something that lets me breathe without flinching. By the time I reached my car, the sun was lowering over Charleston, the sky turning a soft orange that reminded me of the paintings my grandmother once said were made of held breath. I drove to the gallery without thinking. My hands moved automatically on the wheel, as if they had known all along where I needed to go. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the alarm beeped its familiar countdown. The scent of old wood, varnish, and faint lavender polish still lingered, the same blend my mom used when she wanted the place to feel warm for late visitors. The lights were off, but the windows held enough of the fading sun to paint streaks of gold across the floor. For the first time in weeks, the gallery felt like it belonged to me again. Not because the court said so, not because the trust had been protected, because the silence welcomed me. Instead of accusing me, I walked slowly past each painting, letting my fingers hover just above the frames without touching them. My grandmother's landscape of a Carolina marsh, my mom's favorite watercolor of a woman standing at the edge of a pier. I could almost feel their presence beside me, not as ghosts, but as steady markers of the life they built before anyone tried to take it apart. I sat on the long wooden bench in the center of the room. I had sat here countless times as a child, swinging my legs, watching my mom arrange exhibits with an ease that made art feel like air. I sat here the night she told me that this gallery would be mine someday. I sat here when she died, unable to imagine running it without her. And now I sat here again, knowing that everything she left me had been tested and survived. The truth was, I did not win my dad back today. And that realization came with a strange kind of peace. What broke between us had started long before the lawsuit. It had begun in the quiet ways he dismissed my voice, the subtle ways he insisted he knew better, the moments he chose control over connection. The truth had only revealed what was already there. He had wanted the gallery, not me. The case had simply shown me that in full daylight. I walked into my mom's old office next. Her desk still sat in the corner, polished smooth by years of her hands resting on it. I opened the drawer carefully, the same drawer I opened when I became owner. Inside were her old sketchbooks, her notes on exhibitions, a handful of Polaroids she took of me painting as a teenager. One picture stopped me. I was 15, hair pulled back in a messy knot, standing at the big easel in the back studio. I had been painting one of my earliest pieces. My mom had written on the bottom with her looping handwriting, "She sees the world in color others cannot imagine." I traced the words with my thumb and felt something warm and painful rise in my chest. That was the last time I let myself believe I had talent without apologizing for it. Until now. I carried the photo to the back studio. The light switch flicked on with a soft pop. The easel I had unfolded days earlier was still standing in the corner, waiting. I ran my hand along the worn edges, feeling the grooves of old paint hardened along its legs. It felt like touching an older version of myself, one I had tucked away and promised I would return to someday. I opened my paint cabinet and scanned the tubes, each one labeled, organized, ready. I had kept my pseudonym to protect the gallery from being defined by me, but now that I had the truth on my side, the choice to remain anonymous felt different. It felt like a choice instead of a hiding place. I squeezed a little ochre onto the palette, then a dab of ultramarine, then white. My hands moved out of habit, but my heart moved with intention. I started sketching the outline of the same marsh sky that always appeared in my memory when life felt too loud. Wide horizon. Soft light, the suggestion of wind brushing the water. As I painted, I realized something simple and clear. I did not need to show this painting to anyone. I did not need to sign it, R. Kell. I did not need my dad's approval or society's praise. I just needed to make something that told me I was still here. When the canvas held the first layers of color, I stepped back. It was unfinished, but alive. Like me. I left the brush in the jar and walked back into the dim gallery. The room felt fuller now, as if my mom and grandmother were walking the floor with me, proud in a quiet way only family can be. My dad would not call, I knew that. He would not apologize. He would not see himself as the architect of his own downfall. People like him rarely did. But he had lost the one thing he never imagined losing. He had lost the ability to shape who I was. I turned off the exhibition lights one by one until the gallery sank into evening. Stillness again. Through the windows, the street lamps flickered on, washing the sidewalk with soft gold. For the first time since this began, I did not feel small. I did not feel unheard. I felt whole. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the cool night air. Somewhere inside the building behind me, my grandmother's vision still lived. My mom's values still breathed, and my own voice finally found a place beside theirs instead of underneath them. I walked to my car slowly, letting the moment settle in my bones. A family does not define a person. A parent does not get to be the author of someone else's worth. I had learned that lesson the hard way, but it was mine now. Before getting in, I looked back at the gallery one last time. The windows glowed faintly, reflecting the sky's last hint of color. Then I spoke softly into the night. I am not who you tried to make me. I am who I chose to be, and that was enough. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.